Welcome to Psychologist Talks. Today's going to be the first episode in the series about antisocial personality disorder. Now, if you've been following along, my channel has been a little bit of a break since I last did a personality disorder series. I'm real anxious to get back into it and excited to tap into antisocial. It takes a little bit less work. I think I'll know a little bit more about it. There's a few others that are a little bit more challenging, but yeah, I'm going to jump into antisocial. Now, if you've seen my series, I always start with key elements, and then I usually will move through, development and subtypes, etc. So I try to keep the information relatively distinct, but I'm anticipating a problem with the antisocial personality disorder, and that is because it is a very flawed construct. And so there's going to be a few layers that are likely to come up in today's episode, but also future episodes. And most likely it's going to be, one, talking about conduct disorder. Now, conduct disorder is a condition that can be diagnosed technically in adulthood, but is a precursor to antisocial personality disorder. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And most importantly, differentiating the sort of latent, sort of underlying constructs of antisocial that's kind of more behavioral based versus the antisocial that begins to greater resemble psychopathy, which is a different thing. Psychopathy is not a diagnosis. It could be listed as having features under antisocial personality disorder, but I don't think that's going to be a set in stone sort of thing, because these are two very different beasts and we have to figure out what to do with them. So I'm going to try my best to kind of illustrate that as I go through these episodes, and we'll see how much it comes up in this episode. So forgive me for the extra explanation, but I think going to be really important in this series. So I'm looking down here, these key features episodes, I basically just go through the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. This is the 5TR, the most recent version. I don't really think they changed much more in the description side of thing, if anything. Anyway, I'll just kind of talk through it experientially, kind of what I know, and again, if there's any rhyme and reason for differentiating, and then we'll head into future episodes. So there are 7 criteria total. Now remember, you don't have to meet all of them. It is a mixture of, this one says only 3 or more. Pretty impressive. The threshold is quite low, but remember, it needs to be sufficiently severe, pervasive, and persistent. And very importantly, with antisocial personality disorder, there needs to be evidence of an onset around the age of 15. So this doesn't just magically appear out of the blue in adulthood, in somebody's 20s or 30s. And meanwhile, there also needs to be evidence of conduct disorder before the age of 15. Now, what are they trying to do here? What they're essentially saying is antisocial personality disorder is there's a deeper, richer process at play here. And when we look at conduct disorder, the earlier the onset, the worse the outcome, as well as you typically get a little bit more of the low empathy manipulation stuff that's going on. And this is where we're treading into that term psychopathy, which is not technically a diagnosis, right? And so that's what they're trying to do, is say hey, this can't just be a behavioral issue that crops up in adolescence, which can be a very stormy and stressy time. It's when kids can get involved in gangs, et cetera, et cetera. We're adding these extra qualifiers in here to really try to narrow the focus on a legitimate diagnosis, because antisocial personality disorder is overrepresented in the incarcerated population. Why? Well, there's a huge behavioral issue. There's an antisociality around behavior, but that is technically still different than what antisocial personality disorder foundationally sort of is supposed to be. Again, there's confusion. This is the problem, and I'll try to sort it out. Anyway, that's kind of the backdrop here. This is not just 3 symptoms, boom, you're done. Evidence of diagnosable, retrospective, if not actually cataloged conduct disorder before the age of 15, and this needs to be showing up by 15. So that's number 1, so to speak. The actual number 1 on the list of, you got to meet at least 3 or more of these, is a failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. Now, I want to focus first and foremost on the repeated part. So, there's some people in life. I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, very in depth about their life. There are people who never get in trouble with the law. Now, it would be important to note, just because you never got in trouble with the law doesn't mean you don't have a social personality disorder. But this sort of repeated antisocial breaking laws, those sorts of things, is really important because I've also met tons of people that break the law once or twice, or they have like a short stint, right? It's this just constant breaking of the social norms and unlawful behaviors, and the sort of repeat offenders, if you will. Now, notice it also says that our grounds for arrest, and that is trying to capture the whole, hey, you might not actually have a legal rap sheet, because had you been caught, it would have been grounds for arrest. And some people don't get caught. So that's number one. But you'll notice how very behavioral that is. That is very much focused on behavior itself. It doesn't say anything about the underlying motivation or emotional state of the unlawful behavior, the repeated unlawful behavior. So, number 2 is deceitfulness, as indicated by, here's that word again, repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. Now, there's a couple layers to this one. Deceit can still be very behavioral in nature, right? The aliases to obscure one's identity, and you're conning for personal profit. And so from a more legal profiteering behavioral standpoint, this is like, I'm going to get my needs met. I'm going to get what I am due, what I feel I'm due, and I'm going to use whatever means I need to secure that. And deceit becomes a mechanism for obtaining that outcome. This can be slightly different, and looking down, because we're getting towards number 7, where deceit can also mean like, I don't care about the emotional ramifications or the relational ramifications whatsoever. And so much that, I should say, not that I don't care, it doesn't even come up inside of me, right? So it's vague in this term, and this is where, you'll commonly get multiple elevations at once because they kind of cascade into one another. But the devil's in the details in this one, because there's the deceit that is really just about behavioral means to an end, right? Gang, because that's what I need to do. Acquiring money because there's not more fruitful means or methods. This is what was taught to me, versus like, I don't care, and nobody needed to teach me this. I do what I want and how I want, and I don't care the impact. And by the way, I also get what I want. There are 2 very different flavors to that. One is more, again, behaviorally driven. The other, not just behavioral, but also has this sort of maliciousness, this kind of psychopathic-esque vibe behind it. Number 3 is impulsivity and failure to plan ahead. Now, this one's very behavioral. The idea is that there is, there is something temperamentally, there could be something neurocognitively going on where these folks just fire off. There is an impulse, there is a need, there is a desire, and boom, they're off and going at it. And the failure to plan ahead is kind of an interesting subset. Sometimes when you talk to folks with antisocial personality, there's a lack of intentionality. It's just like need action, and they're not really doing the math in between. Well, that could hurt that person, and this could cascade into this. I don't care. I'm going for the need. Now, again, only 3 of these are needed, so you can actually find people that are not that impulsive. Their emotions or their desires might have think of it as like an impulsivity, as like an indifference to the collateral damage, but are actually very planful and mindful in that process. And again, that creates a slight difference between kind of one type versus another type. Number 4 is irritability and aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated, and there's that good old word again, physical fights or assaults. Now, this one really comes and goes. I mean, you can get the antisocial folks who, they really are just loose cannons. And I think that cascades with that impulsivity piece, that there is this disinhibition. And so they run real hot. And so they tend to be more reckless. They tend to cause a lot of problems, and they just can't stop themselves, right? There is some sort of insult to their ability to obtain an outcome, or some sort of insult to the ego, and they crush that. Literally as well as figuratively. And so that repeated fighting and assaulting can also cascade into, again, a means to an end. I don't care if I have to hurt somebody if that's how I get my money, right? Boom. That's what you do. Again, a mixed bag, though. There are other people that are extremely reserved. And if anything, any aggressiveness is targeted and very precise. And those are, again, we're getting into the scarier folks. Number 5, a reckless disregard for the safety of self or others. I've already kind of mentioned this, right? Like when you're so preoccupied of getting a means to an end, something is a means to an end. And especially when you mix that with impulsivity, there's not a lot of regard for the safety of others because, it's a dog-eat-dog world. And some of this can absolutely be learned. It's just learned behavior. There's very much a utilitarian, it's more of a behavioral-based condition of just like, again, needs. I don't care the ramifications because sure as hell nobody cared about the ramifications on me, right? Dog-eat-dog, dog-eat-dog. What's interesting, too, is the failure to kind of attend to one's own personal safety. And that kind of, to me, collides a lot with, did we already do it again? No, we hadn't done it. It's sort of risk-taking. And that goes with impulsivity to a certain degree. And again, it's just like it's a lack of planning ahead. The outcome is what is more important. The need, the thing I want to obtain is so important. I'm aware it could potentially hurt me, but I just don't really care about that, right? I'm accustomed to this sort of danger and this sort of risk, so I'm going to put myself in harm's way. Okay, what are you going to do? Oh, and by the way, often I'm willing to put other people at risk too. What's really interesting when you get to very, very deceitful people is they're willing to use other people as pawns. So think of it less as like the safety of others is not just the target. Sometimes it's the accomplice. And it's just like, yeah, I pretend my way into thinking like we're a dynamic duo, but the minute it behooves me, this person's expendable. And again, we're trending a little bit more towards the not so savory version of things, which is cascading, I hope, here into the final items. No, it's really item 7. So let's recap here real quick, just so we're not losing track. Number 1, failure to conform to social norms. Number 2, that deceitfulness, which again, devil's in the details of how we define deceit. Number 3, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. Number 4, that irritable, aggressive, prone to fights, prone to assaults sort of thing. Number 5, disregard for safety of self and very frequently others. And here we go, number 6. Consistent irresponsibility as indicated by, there's that lovely word again, repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. Now, this one's kind of interesting because this one, I don't, it's not like I work with tons of people or assess tons of people with antisocial personality disorder, but it really, to me, runs the gamut. There are absolutely people who, in their hustle to get the means, in their hustle to get to the ends, and all things are a means to an end, the idea of consistent work just doesn't make sense. It's like, why would I report to somebody and have that degree of responsibility when I could just do what I want? Meanwhile, I'm going to use and abuse finances to get what I want. So, of course, I'm going to promise things, I'm going to commit to things, but I'm not going to follow through because it's all just a giant game to get to what we want, what is comfortable, very, egocentric. I have my needs and my wants, and I'm going to do whatever I need, and doing whatever I need is not necessarily in alignment with responsibility. However, again, tread more towards psychopathy. These individuals, there's greater intentionality, and so I think they're capable of. They play the part better, right? There's this. It's almost like this. I hesitate to use this word because it's too positive. I think in a way, there is this wisdom in understanding of like, if I look the part, I will be more effective at getting what I want. The con will not be a house of cards that will so easily fall. And again, these are the scarier folks because they see the system more fully, more richly, And in doing so, they're far more, intentional and smarts. I mean, I'll use it. They're smart, and so they're not as, they it's still a means to an end, right? But they pause and they see it well enough to be like, but I'm not going to be a fool about this either, right? I'm not so inclined towards my personal needs. I'm going to put myself so much at risk, and violate the norm so much that I'll be so easily detected and potentially land in jail or whatever it might be. And so there is a next level component to that finally cascades into number 7. Again, not all of them, but 3 or more. And that is the lack of remorse. And this is, I think, one of probably the hugest kind of debatable issues, and particularly important when we talk about differentiating between types of conduct disorder, particularly in adolescence, as well as differentiating between, this construct supposed to be known as antisocial personality disorder versus psychopathy. And so let me read the full thing. Lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. So again, the devil is technically in the details. When you talk to people who are really defended, whether it's like a trauma-based history, or kind of a temperament thing, there are people who have remorse, but it is buried underneath something. And so it's in there. There's a capacity for empathy. There is a capacity for a greater range of emotion. But again, it's just kind of buried under all this other crap, whether it's trauma or aversive experiences or just like getting into the, unlawful cultures. It behooves people to not have too much remorse. You're not going to survive very long if you do, but you'll notice there's still more of a behavioral drive to that than there is an actual lack of capacity for remorse and empathy. And this is where we start treading towards traditionally, the sort of more colloquial, well, it's not colloquial, it's researched, there's scales on it too, straight up psychopathy, where there's a lack of activation. Like their network, their emotional network does not fire the same as most people. And because of that, it is not like, it's buried. It just ain't there. Or if it is there in the sort of most remote of ways, and you will not see it 99 times out of 100. And again, these are getting towards the truly terrifying people. These are the dangerous ones. These are the ones that are very dangerous to treat as well. But again, you'll notice there's a stark difference between these two worlds of the ones that are like, everything is a means to an end. I could be empathetic. I could technically follow the rules, but I'm either so impulsively inclined to get what I need, or I just this is just the life I live, right? More behaviorally driven, more contextually driven, and sometimes trauma driven, versus everything is a means to an end. I do not care. I am not part of society. I have no interest in associating with people. People are tools. And meanwhile, I'll do literally anything I need to. And in fact, frequently, I'm going to be real planful and real artful in how I con and how I use people to get to those ends. That is that callous, unemotional, kind of more psychopathic tendencies. Now, again, I totally forgot. The DSM as it stands does not actually have, forgive me, a psychopathic subtype. That's actually in the model for consideration. They at least mention psychopathy. I'm not convinced that this does not benefit from some degree of differentiation, right? We have these episodes on subtypes. I'll talk more about this. I might be slightly redundant with today's episode. But I think, particularly when we talk about the overdiagnosis within the criminal justice population, I think differentiating these two could be useful. And forgive me, I forgot to mention the conduct disorder thing. When you talk to child and adolescent providers, they will tell you there's a very, very clear difference between the true lack of remorse ones, where you are seeing this behavior usually at a really young age, like really scary stuff. Animal abuse can be included in that, etc., versus the ones that, like, things were going okay till they hit puberty-esque age, right? 12, 13, 14, they get in the wrong crowds, there's stuff going on at home, and it becomes a slippery slope that looks like, it's conduct disorder, but it's not the same. It is not the same. So, telescoping out, if we just take this at face value, I think there's a rhyme and reason why this can be overdiagnosed, because when you only have 3 of these, it could be anything, right? Like, they're not following social norms, they're a bit impulsive, and they're pretty deceitful. Again, repeatedly, not one-offs, not because they made a bad choice, but I mean, this is dispositionally what they're doing. And tada, you've got antisocial personality disorder. It's like, I feel like we could do a better job being like, here's the richness of the behavioral stuff and the stuff that's a little bit less on the callous manipulative side, and then here's the more callous manipulative stuff. And the really dangerous cases are when those two worlds collide and you see all of the above, whereas there's quite a few people diagnosed that are very much strictly in the behavioral domain. Psychopathy is far less common than this sort of more behaviorally driven, contextually driven antisocial personality disorder, where there's deceitfulness and there's low empathy and there's low remorse and irresponsibility and using people. But again, it's not about fundamental underlying deficits. It is a burying of the capacity and more of a learned behavior. And with that, there's actually more of a possibility, not a guarantee, of rehabilitation. Whereas with psychopathy, we get into the scary zone that when you try to rehabilitate them, get into the treatment episode, my apologies, you can actually teach them to con people better. So, that's the key features. Forgive me if I was over elaborate, but hopefully kind of helpful to hear. I also understand not everybody views every single episode, so stay tuned. I'm going to have more on antisocial personality disorder. I hope this was a helpful reminder and or getting your feet wet into at least the DSM criteria with a little bit of extra explanation and perspective taking about these prospective subtypes or sub-presentations. And unfortunately, the I think frequent misdiagnosis that follows. So yeah, stay tuned. Thanks as always for listening and or watching, and stay curious.